Hi, Steve Adubato coming to you from NJIT's Jim Wise Theater. This is Newark at a Crossroads. We're talking to the most interesting people we could find. They're just the most interesting people overall, and about to prove it right now. I want to introduce a good friend and someone who's been a mentor to so many of us. He's Dr. Clement Price, Board of Governors, Distinguished Service Professor, Rutgers University in Newark, who heads up an operation at Rutgers, Newark. The official name of the center is?
The Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience, Steve.
A center not to be confused with an institute, which is even more prestigious.
There you go.
Clem, you know, and I mean that, and you know that for a lot of us, you've been a mentor, you've been there for so many of us. When I came up with this idea with Dr. Joel Bloom of doing this, I called you and I said, Clem, what do you think? And you said, let's do this.
Absolutely.
Why is Newark at a crossroads, and what is that crossroads about?
Well, periodically, Newark faces a crossroads, usually having to do with two things: demographic shifts and the perception of the city. And I think we are in the midst of both. Newark is becoming a browner city. It's becoming a more immigrant city. And the tales of woe that used to so much haunt Newark, the perception that Newark was dead, a failed city, that there was nothing really to do here, I think that is now a part of our contemporary past. Most people see Newark as a struggling but very complicated survival of a surviving city, not unlike some of the other, we call them now legacy cities. Who would have thought, what, 20, 25 years ago, that Brooklyn would be the place one wants to live in the five boroughs of New York? Who would have thought that Cleveland would reinvent itself as this really kind of hip, Midwestern town? And I think Newark is going through the same thing.
By the way, for those of you who do not know, Dr. Clement Price is not only the historian for the city of Newark, he's one of the greatest historians in this country and understands perspective on these issues better than most. Question. I've asked several people this, but your perspective on it's really important. 1967 rebellion, riots in Newark. This many years later, I'm not going to ask whether we've ever recovered. That's not the question I'm curious about. What is the enduring impact of those riots, even today, with all the positive things you just talked about?
The most enduring impact of the riots is that we now study the riots. They're not an aberration anymore. There's been nearly a generation of scholarship, some of it focusing on Newark, that raises this question: what happened to urban America in the 4 or 5 decades after the end of World War II? When you raise that question with respect to Newark, and it's been raised now for 30 years, and the answers are becoming prescient in the scholarship. Most scholars know that Newark's decline begins in the 1930s and accelerates in the 1950s and 60s. We didn't really know that, say in 1965, 66, 67. In fact, when Newark celebrated its 300th anniversary, we were about to celebrate the 350th, you never had a sense that the city was in trouble. But now we know that trouble is threaded throughout Newark's DNA, and the city has always, pushed back and fought on and survived.
You know, we've always, if you read Bob Curvin's book, and you know it well, and we have Bob Curvin in the series, or Junius Williams, who is part of the series as well. A lot of those books and others who write about Newark, a lot of looking for a savior. The next mayor of Newark is going to be a savior. Cory Booker is going to be a savior. Sharp James was a savior. In 1970, Ken Gibson is elected after a corrupt mayor. Hugh Adenizio goes to jail because he's all mobbed up and et cetera. Is that the wrong thing to be? And now Ras Baraka is the mayor of this city. Looking for a savior. Bad strategy?
Terrible vision. What saves cities is a sense of civic fellowship.
So hold on, people ask the question, can Ras Baraka turn it around? That's not even the right question.
That's not the right question.
Go ahead.
Why would we put Newark's foundational turnaround on one man or one woman's shoulder? So I think that what needs to happen, and you see some of this in Baraka's rhetoric during the campaign: when I become mayor, we become mayor. And I think what Raz was doing, and I think he did it successfully, certainly was elected, is begin to spread the responsibility for what becomes of Newark. So I think we may be entering an era in which people will reconnect to Newark, people who are in Newark reconnecting to their city, and people who left this city 40, 50 years ago, finding some spiritual way to identify with the city. When Newark turns 350 years old in 2016, we hope to use that occasion to interrogate the history of the city, to celebrate those things that should be celebrated, and to acknowledge the work yet to be done. And if we can do that, we will have shown not only ourselves, but the nation, that 100 years after Newark became 250, the city is now a mature part of the urban metropolis.
The superintendent of the Newark Public Schools, Cammie Anderson, put there by the state of New Jersey, by Governor Chris Christie, will be part of this series. You know the public school system very well.
Yeah, and I know Cammie very well.
How much of the success or the future of the city as we are at a crossroads is going to be dependent upon the success of those? I used to say 50,000 kids in the public school system. It's not that number anymore.
Right.
It's significantly less than that. How much of it depends upon the success of Cammie Anderson and those who are running the Newark Public Schools?
Again, I wouldn't put too much on Cammie Anderson's considerable
But we
shoulders.
keep doing that. We keep saying, how did that superintendent do?
Well, that's just...
Is that a setup?
That's poor visioning, and it might be a setup. Cammie Anderson has perhaps the toughest job in Newark, and she is going to have to rely on people like you and me, let's call ourselves civic stewards, to provide some space and many opportunities for her to succeed. The demonizing of Cammie Anderson is something that doesn't speak very well of the city.
Listen, we're not getting too inside here, folks, because this isn't just about Newark. It's about folks who try to change things. I want to ask you something. You've never held back talking about race or anything else. Cammie Anderson's white. She is from New York City, from Harlem. She comes in from the state, and she proceeds to propose change. Now, forget about what the particulars of the change may be. But let's assume for a moment that she wants to improve the lives of the students of 37, 35,000, whatever it is, public school kids in the city. Do you believe that a significant degree of the opposition that she has gotten for trying to do that, close some schools, let some teachers go who didn't think they were doing a good job, whatever, consolidate, is a product of her being white and an outsider from the city? Some of it.
We've talked about race as long as we've known each other, more than half a lifetime, Steve. Race is always a proxy in Newark.
Is it always there?
It is always in the room. And I think with respect to Cammie Anderson, the fact that she's perceived of as a white person, the fact that she's a white woman perceived of solely on those terms, may have made it very difficult for her to get things done. I was the chair of a task force that recommended Cammie Anderson to the governor, to the mayor, and to the commissioner of education, at that time, Chris Cerf. The reason why my colleagues and I made that recommendation, it was clear to us over the course of the 3, 4, 5 months that we gathered and interviewed Cammie and among other candidates, that she was more than white.
More than white?
Yeah, in other words, whiteness, not unlike blackness, can be an essentialist way of saying someone is only white. And I would say that Cammie is more than white. She is a talented, tough-minded, intellectually gifted, and daring educational leader. Such people, whether they're white or black, are oftentimes run out of town. I mean, I think the average tenure of urban superintendent, 2 or 3 years. So her whiteness might be a stumbling block, but it should not be the primary stumbling block. How does she interact with parents? Do the kids admire her? How has she faced up to Newark's almost obsessive suspicion of outsiders? For God's sakes, Steve, I'm an outsider. I'm from Washington, D.C.
But you were accepted.
I was probably accepted because the outsider-insider dynamic wasn't as much in play when I came to Newark in 1968 as it became, during that long 20-year period when Newark was declining. A lot of that decline was blamed on outside interests. I was already here. I was already committed to
Right.
not only working here, but moving here and studying this place.
Isn't it ironic that a city that struggles in so many ways, we've got a lot of great things going, you know, for us in the city, but that there'd be anything other than the attitude, hey, let's just take everyone and anyone who's got talent and ability, wants to invest, whether it's money or whatever it is. Regardless of where they come from, what color they are, isn't it amazing that it's anything other than that? Or maybe it's not amazing. Maybe it's more natural. I don't want to be overly philosophical here, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Where do we go from here to take advantage of our location, the airport? We're going to be talking to the head of United Airlines. Where do we go given the fact the NJ PAC is doing well, that Prudential is here, Panasonic is here. Downtown's happening, right, Clem?
Right.
How do we parlay this?
Where do we go from here? And I'm glad that you'll speak to Bob. For the longest time, Bob Curvin, Bob Curvin has said things are actually in place in Newark. We just have to connect the dots. And I'll leave this one thought with you. How is it that a city that has more university and college students than any other city in New Jersey doesn't feel like a college town, doesn't take advantage of the assets of having a university, 2, 3 universities.
NJIT, Rutgers, Seton Hall, Berkeley,
That's right.
Essex County College.
You go on and on.
Like
you go on and on. You can pick your sector: higher education, the arts, the humanities, architecture. I mean, I hope you have walked through Military Park.
Oh my God, we're Dan Biederman just here. So we don't feel enough like a college town?
No.
What would it take?
More college students on the streets of Newark. More college students making their way across Broad Street to go to NJ PAC. More college and university students visiting the glorious galleries of the Newark Public Library. More college students putting down a civic investment in the city. In other words, this city has been enormously good to me. And whatever little I can do to repay the investment the city made in me, I see it as my privilege and my duty as a resident of this town.
But you know, you take people on tours all the time around the city. It's always fascinating. People say, they say, Clement Price took me on a tour, and I say, where did he take you? You take people through Branchbrook Park.
Sure.
You take people up in my old neighborhood, and
Sure.
I like to call it Forest Hill, but we never actually lived in Forest.
Right.
Forest Hill is the richer section of the North Ward, where I actually lived in the
right.
North Ward. Take them up there. You take them a week, you take them all over the city. Are they mostly suburbanites?
I would say yes. Most.
What's the reaction?
To be blunt, oh my, I had no idea this city had so many assets. And let me just mention one thing about those tours. The part of the tour that I'm getting the most out of, and because in many ways it's theater. If it's a minibus or a manageable number of people, we get off the bus, we walk across, what would that be? West Market.
Yes.
And we sit with President Lincoln, the Gutzon
Oh my
Borglum
God.
statue. People used to bring kids would
sit on Lincoln's knee.
You sit next to the
You sit on
president.
Lincoln's knee.
That was one of those Newark civic rituals, and we don't do it anymore. I do it because I think when you can show someone the power of art, or as you just put it so well, when you can look east and see how Newark rises up from the Passaic River, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So that's just one of the assets that the city has, and it needs to deploy that asset in its schools and its churches in the way we look at ourselves in the 21st century.
Dr. Clement Price, I was very glad that you took my call several months back.
Always.
And I said, Clem, you think we should do this? Joel Bloom thinks we should do it. And he said, who should we get together? And he gave us some great names. And I'm so glad you found the time to be with us.
Absolutely.
Because it would not be complete without you.
Thank you,
Newark is
Steve.
at a crossroads, and I'm glad you're with us.
You bet.
Stay there.
All right.
Thanks. We'll continue from NJIT right after this. Stay with us.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato at NJIT has been provided by New Jersey Institute of Technology, Prudential Financial's Global Communications Department, Audible.com, Barnabas Health, TD Bank, Josh S. Weston, and by the law firm of Gibbons, P.C. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. This program has been made possible in part by the Fidelco Group.